Story 2, Midnight Mass in the Holler. I grew up just off Cold Branch Road in a town so small it barely had a name. My granddad used to say we were more holler than town, and most folks agreed. He raised me on stories, the kind that stick to your ribs more than your head. Some were tall tales, sure, but others felt like warnings. The one he told most often was about the church down in Shaded Holler. Said it was older than the county, older than any map. It burned once, maybe twice. But it never stayed dead. He'd point his long finger out toward the ridgeline and say, "That place holds a midnight mass, but not for the livin'." As a kid, I thought he was just trying to scare me. As a teenager, I laughed it off. I even joked about driving out that way with my buddies once. But something always came up. Or maybe, deep down, I didn't want to know if the story had teeth. It wasn't until last year, on a fog-heavy September night, that I found myself near Shaded Holler by accident. I'd been driving back from a cousin's wedding 2 towns over, half drunk on cider and nostalgia, when the GPS rerouted me. Said a logging truck had jackknifed near the main road, so it sent me down a narrow back road I didn't recognize. The fog was thick as wool, like it had a mind of its own, clinging low to the pavement and swallowing my headlights whole. The deeper I drove, the more wrong things felt. The trees on either side leaned too close, their branches low and black like they were reaching for something. My tires hissed on the wet road, no signs, no lights, just dark, crooked pines, and the sense I'd slipped somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. That's when I saw it. Through the trees, just off a bend in the road, was a building I didn't recognize at first, long and low with warped boards and a collapsed steeple. What stopped me cold wasn't the church itself, but the light, candlelight, warm and flickering, poured through the broken windows like it was welcoming someone home. The windows were all shattered, glass like teeth still clinging to the frames, but the light pulsed behind them, steady and soft. I slowed to a crawl. My breath fogged the windshield. I should have kept driving, I know that now, but something in me, curiosity maybe, told me to stop, just a minute, just to listen. I rolled the window down and killed the engine. At first, I only heard the usual forest sounds, the chirp of frogs, the shuffle of wind through trees, but then it all went quiet, like something pulled a sheet over the world, the kind of silence that has weight. Then I heard the bells, not loud, not suddenly, just soft, drawn-out chimes that carried low over the fog. They didn't sound like church bells exactly, more like something older, hollow and tired, like they were trying not to wake something. They rang in a rhythm that didn't match time and didn't ask for attention. It was more like a lullaby, a call. That's when I saw movement. Through the broken doors of the church, shadows passed, tall ones, lean. At first I thought it was the candlelight playing tricks, but no. They moved in patterns, not random, like a procession. Their movements were slow, almost too slow, like a film played at the wrong speed. One would sway, pause, then another would follow behind. I watched them pass between pews that weren't there anymore, stepping over boards as if walking paths only they could see. I couldn't make out faces, just long silhouettes, heads bowed, arms limp at their sides. And then, all at once, they stopped. Every shadow froze in place, like they knew I was watching. I don't remember starting the engine, but suddenly it was roaring in my ears and my hands were white on the wheel. I backed up fast, tires crunching gravel, heart jackhammering in my chest. As I turned the car round, my headlights swept across the face of the church. That's when I saw something written across the side in long, soot-colored strokes. "The Lord is my shepherd," Psalm 23. The rest of it was smeared, like ash dragged by fingers. I drove hard until the road gave way to pavement again, and I didn't stop until I was back under streetlights. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I went out to wash the car. The fog had left the paint wet with dew, but on the back windshield, there was writing, faint but visible, ash-grey smudges in the same hand. Yeah, though I walk. No one could have done that. No one knew where I'd gone. I hadn't told a soul. I checked the rear-view camera footage, but the system had glitched. Nothing recorded between 11:58 p.m. and 12:21 a.m. Just static. I kept it to myself for a while. Didn't seem worth sharing. Who? Story 3. Where the bell tower shouldn't be I hike, because I don't do people all that well. Not anymore. Solitude settles better on me than company ever did, and the woods don't ask you for anything except your silence. They let you be, if you let them be too. Most weekends I pack light, grab my boots and gear, and vanish off the grid for a couple nights. No service, no traffic, no noise but wind and leaves. Just the slow rhythm of moving through trees and time. There's a spot I like off Vespers Ridge. Nothing official, not on any trail apps. You have to know where to look. A deer path forks left near an old sycamore that's been struck by lightning and split open like a mouth. Follow that for about half an hour and you get to a creek that never dries up. Past that, the trees thin out. That's where I first noticed it. Last spring, a little before the fog rolled in heavily, I was 3 miles past where I usually turn around. I'd brought a thermos and a tarp with the idea of staying out overnight. As I pushed through a thicket, I saw stone, not boulders, but shaped stone, square, built. I thought maybe it was a cellar ruin or an old smokehouse, but as I stepped through the brush, I realized what I was looking at wasn't ruins. It was a church. It sat squat and still in a clearing that shouldn't have existed. The woods just fell away around it, like the trees had bent their roots to make space. The building was covered in ivy and moss, and the stone was the same color as the forest floor. But what stopped me cold was the bell tower. It looked new. Not clean, exactly, but wrong for the rest of it. Too straight. No moss. Fresh wood along the support beams. The copper on the bell looked recently polished, not corroded like everything else. The rest of the building was falling in on itself, but that bell tower stood like it had just been raised. I circled it slowly, expecting to find signs of someone living nearby, a pack, gear, boot prints, but there was nothing, just quiet. I put a hand on the wall. Cold stone, solid, real. My first thought was maybe I stumbled onto some restoration project, but I'd been hiking Vespers Ridge for years. I'd never seen this. The sun started slipping down around 6:30, and I figured I'd make camp nearby and check it out in the morning. I set up about 50 yards off, close enough to keep the church in sight. Far enough to pretend it didn't bother me. I kept telling myself it was just a building, just stone and timber. Maybe some deep-pocketed church group had bought the land and started restoring it. Or maybe I was just lucky enough to find something old. That night, the forest changed. At exactly 12:03, I heard the bell. One toll, long and low, like it came from inside the bones of the earth. It didn't echo, just settled over everything like a wet cloth. I sat up, heart already hammering. The fire was still going, crackling low, but everything else had stopped. No crickets, no wind, just that single sound hanging heavy in the air. Then my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. That didn't make sense. I haven't had service since yesterday. I fished it out, expecting nothing but a battery warning. Instead, there was a message. Leave before the 3rd toll. No number, no signal, no data, just those 5 words. I stared at it for a long while. My breath came in tight, shallow gasps. Something about the phrasing hit me in the gut. Not leave now, not get out. It was specific, measured, like whoever, whatever sent it was giving me a chance. A narrow one, but I didn't move. I wish I could tell you why. Pride, maybe. Or some deeper curiosity I should have buried. I thought, maybe if I just stayed put and didn't go near it, I'd be fine. The second toll rang 10 minutes later. It was louder. Not by much, just enough to feel it in the dirt beneath me. I stood, brushing leaves off my jeans, and stared at the church. The bell was moving now, swaying gently in the moonlight, but there was no rope, nothing tying it to the ground or to any hand that could be pulling. That's when I realized the tower had no stairs, no ladder, nothing leading up to where the bell sat. I took a step back, then another. The fire dimmed suddenly, like someone had smothered it without touching it. I didn't look away from the tower. I kept expecting to see someone appear. Some old caretaker, a priest maybe, but no one came. And then, as the clock hit 12:13, the third toll sounded. The woods changed. The silence deepened in a way I didn't know was possible. Even silence has texture, the breath of trees, the hum of life. But this was absent, like the forest had ceased to exist beyond the light of my fire. My ears rang from the weight of it, my eyes watered. I turned to grab my bag, but I froze. There were footprints in the dirt, not mine, just 3, bare. Leading from the direction of the church and stopping about 2 feet behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. Just a cold night and still trees. I didn't pack my gear. I didn't stamp out the fire. I just ran, crashed through underbrush and low branches until I hit the creek and followed it back toward the ridge. I didn't stop until I saw the first trail marker. I drove home that night, shaking the whole way. Slept in the cab of my truck in a gas station parking lot because I couldn't face the silence of my own house. The next day, I went online. I tried to find a record of a church near Vespers Ridge. Nothing. I searched old land deeds, ghost towns, even old missionary routes from the 1800s. Still nothing. No maps, no photos, no mention. I didn't hike for a while after that. When I finally went back, months later, I took the same trail, same path, same creek. I searched for 2 days. The church was gone. No clearing, no stone, not even the worn patch where I'd made camp. Just unbroken forest. I stood there for a long time, trying to convince myself I'd gotten turned around. Maybe the woods had just grown back fast. But deep down, I knew better. I still have that message on my phone. Can't delete it, can't forward it. Just 5 words. Locked there like a scar. Sometimes, if I'm honest, I still hear the bell. Not every night, but now and then, around 12:03, it'll toll once. Faint and far away. And when it does, I listen. Not for the second toll, but for the silence that follows. Because if it ever gets that quiet again, truly quiet, I'm not sure I'll have time to run. Story 4, The Bells Beneath the Floorboards. I came up to Cragg County because work had dried up down south, and a friend of mine owed me a favor. He'd picked up a contract to help restore a church halfway up a hill overlooking the hollow, one of those old Appalachian structures built before folks figured out how to make buildings last. The walls were good, thick stone, 1880s by the looks of it, but the roof was half collapsed, the stained glass cracked like ice, and the floor bowed in places where the foundation had given up on itself. My job was simple: gut the place, reinforce the bones, and leave the ghosts alone. That's what the locals said when we got there, like a joke that didn't sound much like a joke. You can fix the roof, boys, just don't stir what's under it. I didn't ask questions. I've worked up in the mountains before. Folks tell you things sideways out here, not in words, but glances, pauses, old warnings half swallowed. The church sat quiet on a ridge surrounded by black walnut trees, their twisted branches reaching like fingers too long for their arms. It had no name left, just a stone placard worn blank by wind and time. Inside, it smelled like wet ash and cedar, and the pulpit was half rotted. We cleared pews, hauled out mouldy hymnals, and took inventory of anything worth saving. That's when we found the trap door. It was tucked beneath the pulpit platform, under a slab of dry, rotted boards. You wouldn't have noticed it unless you were looking. I only caught it because my boot hit a hollow spot that echoed strangely. The others had gone outside for lunch, so I pried it open myself. The hinges screamed like they hadn't moved in 100 years. Beneath was a narrow set of stone steps leading into darkness. No dust, no cobwebs, like someone had swept it clean recently. I should have waited, but I didn't. I took my flashlight and went down. It wasn't much of a basement, just a square room with stone walls and one object in the middle. A bell. Not like the one we'd taken down from the steeple earlier in the week. This one was smaller, darker, iron turned black with time. It sat in a perfect circle of salt, not sprinkled, poured, precise. I stared at it a long while, then stepped closer, shining my light across the surface. No clapper, no chain, but etched along the rim were words I didn't recognize. Symbols, maybe. Or just worn too smooth to read. I don't believe in that kind of thing. I grew up Baptist. I know a tool when I see one, and this looked like a tool someone was scared to use. Still, I didn't feel scared. Just uneasy. Like the air was too still, too heavy. Like something was waiting for me to decide something. So I did. I stepped over the salt and picked up the bell. It was heavier than it looked. Cold, too. I didn't shake it or ring it or do anything stupid. I just lifted it, took it up the stairs and set it on a work table in the main hall. I swept the salt away after, didn't think twice about it. That night I stayed in the old caretaker's cabin behind the church. No plumbing, just a cot, a stove, and a view of the chapel through the cracked window. Around midnight, I heard it. The bell, from the steeple, 3 slow tolls. But that was impossible. We'd removed the clapper from the bell earlier that week. We'd taken it down and stored it in a supply shed for repair. No one was supposed to be up there. No one could have been. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, and walked toward the church. It was dead quiet except for the wind pushing through the trees. I scanned the bell tower but saw no movement. The windows were dark, the front doors were closed, but I could feel something watching. Not from outside, from within, like the walls themselves were waiting. I went back to bed. I didn't sleep. The next day I asked the crew if they'd heard anything. One guy laughed, another shrugged. They hadn't stayed on site. They drove in each day from town. I didn't bring it up again, but that night it happened again. Only this time, after the toll from above, I heard another sound, softer, fainter, from beneath. It was the same pitch, the same rhythm, but it sounded muffled, like it came from under the floorboards. I got up, went into the church, and stood in the dark, listening. And I swear, I heard it echo from beneath my boots, just one ring. Then silence. I tried to find the trap door, but it wasn't there. I pulled up every board behind the pulpit, every beam. There was no hollow space, no staircase, just a stone foundation. Like it had always been that way. The small bell was still on the work table. I touched it, it was warm. That was 4 nights ago. Since then the bell rings every night. First from the tower, then, minutes later, from somewhere within the walls. Sometimes I hear it in the chimney. Sometimes it echoes from the rafters, though there's no one up there. Once, I heard it behind the stone itself, like the building was holding breath between rings, and every time I go looking, the layout's the same. No trapdoor, no salt, just stone, like whatever I found was only meant to be seen once. I've stopped sleeping. Every night, a minute after midnight, it begins. 3 slow tolls. And I wait. Because the sound is getting closer. Last night, it didn't come from the church. It came from beneath the cabin floor. And this morning, when I opened the door, I found 3 small piles of salt lined neatly on the threshold. No footprints, no tracks. Just a warning. I'm leaving tomorrow. I have to. I don't know what I disturbed, but it's not finished with me. And I can't help but feel like it's waiting for the 3rd toll to change, for it to mean something else. For the bell to call something out instead of warning it to stay in. I just hope I'm not here when it does. Story 5, Toll of the Widow's Bell. After Maggie died, I didn't much care where I ended up. The days after the funeral felt like walking underwater, slow, heavy, muffled. I didn't want to see the city anymore. Didn't want to see our kitchen, her half of the closet, the chair she used to sit in while folding laundry. So when I saw the listing for a place up on the mountain, dirt cheap, remote, a little run down, I took it. Sight unseen. It was an old parsonage beside a long abandoned church in what used to be a mining town, way out past Cragg's Hollow. One of those places where the trees grow too close and the fog sits like it's trying to remember something. The kind of place where time forgets you and you're okay with that. The house leaned a bit, like an old man trying not to fall asleep. Paint peeled off the clapboard siding and the porch sagged in the middle. But the view was something else. Hills stretched out like green waves, and when the wind blew just right, it sounded like a choir humming under its breath. The church beside it had lost its roof a long time ago. Vines climbed the broken stained glass, and the bell tower tilted like it didn't trust its own legs. I liked it, honestly. Nothing alive but the trees and the wind. Nothing to remind me of the sound of her laugh. The first time I heard the bell was my 3rd week up there. I'd fallen asleep in the armchair. Book on my chest, mug of cold tea beside me. Around midnight, the silence in the room shifted. That strange hush you only notice after it's already happened. I blinked awake and listened. Then it came. 1 toll. Not loud, not sharp. Just a single low ring that hung in the air like smoke. I knew that bell shouldn't work. I'd seen the tower up close. The clapper was gone. The rope was rotted. The floor beneath it was caved in. But still, the bell rang. Then silence again. I tried to explain it away. Old metal settling, wind pushing through the beams. But it kept happening. Always around 12:04 a.m. Just once. No rhythm, no pattern. Just that lonely toll breaking the stillness. A month in, I started noticing the footprints. It had rained 2 nights in a row. Mud pooled in the yard, soft and dark like potter's clay. The 3rd morning, I stepped onto the porch and saw them. Small, barefoot prints, like a child's. Too small for me. Too narrow. They came from the direction of the church. No matching prints leaving. Just coming, then stopping at the front step. I don't have kids. Maggie and I. We tried, but it never happened. We used to talk about what we'd name her if it was a girl. How she might look like Maggie around the eyes. I stood there for a long while staring at those prints, mud drying in the sun, my coffee going cold in my hand. The next night, I stayed up. Didn't read, didn't drink. Just sat in the dark, watching through the window as fog began to creep in low and slow. Around midnight, the world fell quiet again. Then the bell. 1 toll, deep and distant. I stepped onto the porch. The air was damp and still. That kind of still that feels heavier than silence, like the earth's waiting for something to finish. I turned toward the church. She came out slow, a woman in black, gliding rather than walking, like the ground didn't quite know she was there. Her dress was old, not antique. But old in the way grief is old, heavy with years and miles. She didn't look up at first, just moved through the fog toward the trees. Then she stopped, turned. Her face was smooth, blank. No mouth, no nose, no expression, just a suggestion of a face. But her eyes were mine. Same color, same crease beneath the brow, the same tired grief. I froze. Every hair on my arm stood up, but I couldn't move. She stared for what felt like a minute, then turned and disappeared into the mist. I didn't sleep that night, didn't sleep the next one either. And every night since, the bell has rung. Once. 12 I drew 4, followed by the sound of soft, wet footsteps just outside the door, always stopping at the edge of the porch. I started leaving the porch light on, but it made no difference. I've tried recording it, but nothing shows. The audio cuts out. The camera glitches. The footprints are still there every morning. Sometimes I hear a child's giggle, faint and distant, like it's caught in the wind. Sometimes the windows frost from the inside, and I wake up with psalm verses scrawled in the condensation, ones Maggie used to whisper when she thought I was asleep after her diagnosis. I tried to leave once, packed a bag, got in the truck, but the road was gone. I don't mean blocked, I mean gone. Just trees, no gravel, no path. I walked back to the porch and the footprints were already waiting. I don't know what she is. I don't know if it's Maggie or some echo of what we lost, but I feel her getting closer. And the strange thing is, I don't think she wants to hurt me. I think she wants me to understand something. I just don't know if I can survive knowing what it is. Story 7. The Bell That Wasn't There. I wasn't supposed to stop in Harper's Vale. It wasn't on my route, and if the snow hadn't come down the way it did, fat, wet flakes turning to ice as soon as they hit the windshield, I would have kept driving straight through the night. I was on my way to see my sister, up in Pennsylvania after too many years and too many broken phone calls. I told myself I'd get there by morning, but about 100 miles outside Boone, my tires started to slide. The road disappeared under white, the lines vanished, and then I saw the flickering neon sign, Vacancy, Glendale Motel. The place looked like it had been forgotten by time. 1 story, 8 doors, all painted the same shade of chipped green. The parking lot was half ice, half slush, and the office smelled like radiator heat and old cigarettes. The man behind the counter looked surprised to see me, said I was the first guest in weeks. "You're lucky we kept one room open," he muttered as he slid the key across the counter. "Most folks don't stop here anymore. Town's quiet." I nodded, too cold to care. He didn't ask for my ID. Just told me the boiler might knock a bit and not to worry if the power blinked. I was in room 4. The heat barely worked, and the walls were so thin I could hear the wind whistling around the doorframe. Still, it beat the road. I unpacked my overnight bag, turned on the old television, which only got static, and lay on the sagging mattress, listening to the storm thicken outside. Around 12:11. I remember because I looked at the glowing red digits on the clock just before it happened. I heard it. A bell. It rang once. I sat up. It rang again. Then a third time, loud enough to shake the window glass. I stood and looked out into the snow. Nothing moved. No tracks. No wind. The street lamp out front buzzed faintly, and the drifts were untouched. The motel lot was empty, but for my truck. There wasn't even a church in sight. The next morning, the air was blue and brittle with cold. I stepped out, half expecting to see a collapsed steeple or maybe some old bell swinging in the distance. But the town was still. Frozen. I walked to the office for coffee, but the door was locked. No sign of the owner. When I got back to my room, there was something slid under the door. A newspaper clipping. Old, yellowed, edges curling. The headline read, 3 children vanish after final bell tolls. Harper's Vale in shock. The date was February 17th, 1962. Below the headline were 3 black and white school portraits. I didn't recognize the faces, but the names. The names were familiar. I walked back to the bed, heart pounding, and ran my fingers along the old wooden headboard. They were carved there, faint and shaky. Mary, Tommy. June. I hadn't noticed them the night before. Now they stood out like they'd been burned in. I stared at the clipping and read the article 3 times. It said the children had gone missing on a snow-covered night after locals claimed to hear the church bell toll. A bell that hadn't sounded since the steeple fire in '58. There were no tracks, no signs of forced entry, just vanished. The last line stuck with me. Their names will ring long after the bell falls silent. I asked around that day, or tried to, but most of Harper's Vale seemed shuttered, like it hadn't fully woken up since the storm. I found a diner, empty except for a woman behind the counter who looked at me like she already knew what I was going to say. You heard it, she said. I didn't answer. The bell. I nodded. Hasn't been a bell in this town since before I was born, she said, eyes fixed on her coffee pot. But folks still hear it. Always 3 tolls. Always at 12:11. Doesn't matter if the church is gone. Doesn't matter if you're from here or just passing through. I asked about the clipping. She said nothing, just slid a napkin toward me. 3 names written in pen. Not the kids. Mine, my sisters, my nephews. I left that afternoon. Didn't care about the weather. Didn't stop for gas until I hit West Virginia. But that night, in a motel just outside Charleston, I couldn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting. At 12:11, I didn't hear anything. But I dreamt of snow. And a bell that wasn't there. Story 8. The bell heard only once. I'd done that stretch of the Appalachian Ridge a dozen times, the route that snakes along the Tennessee line, thick with pine and hush, nothing but old logging trails and deer tracks. I liked hiking solo, always have. Something about being alone in the woods that makes the rest of the world feel less real. No emails, no phone calls, just your own heartbeat and the soft crush of leaves beneath your boots. It was early autumn, right before the hollers lit up gold and red. I'd planned 3 days out, 2 back. Light pack, solid gear, enough to make it a clean trip. But it wasn't clean. I was maybe 10 miles past the last forestry marker, somewhere just south of Cold Branch Hollow, when I saw the chapel. I almost missed it. The trail curved sharp, and the thing was half hidden by vines and a leaning hemlock. It looked like it had been there 100 years, maybe more. The roof was gone. Beams collapsed inward like ribs pulled from a carcass. The door hung by a single rusted hinge, swaying even though there was no wind. But the walls still stood, stone and timber, bone-coloured in the morning mist. And above it all, hanging somehow from what was left of the steeple, was a bell. It shouldn't have been there. Nothing else up there was intact. And yet, the bell looked wrong, too clean, too perfect, not shiny or new, just untouched. Like it didn't care about time. I stepped closer, curious. Maybe 20 feet away, the air changed, heavier, cooler. I stopped moving. Every hair on my arm stood up. And then the bell rang, just once, a single, high-pitched chime. Not deep like a church bell should be. It was sharp, almost metallic, but inside my head. That's the only way I can describe it. Like it didn't come from the air around me, but from the space between my thoughts. It hit me so hard I dropped to my knees. My vision went white at the edges. My ears rang. Then, black. I don't know how long I was out. I came to on the dirt, head pounding like I'd been hit with something. My pack was still there. So was the chapel. But the bell wasn't ringing anymore. Just silence. Thick, pressing silence. I reached for my watch. 12:12 a.m. That didn't make sense. It had been mid-morning when I found the place. The sun had barely been over the trees, but the sky above me now was dark, deep purple, with just the first hint of dawn nowhere in sight. Like time had folded in on itself, I stood, shaky, and felt something tug near the base of my skull. Behind my right ear, something burned. I touched it and winced. A scar, thin, curved, fresh. I hadn't had anything there before. It felt too clean to be from a fall. No blood, just a line of raised skin, still warm like it had just healed. I tried my compass. Needle spun, never stopped. It just circled slow and steady, like it was looking for something it couldn't find. The trail was gone. I turned in a full circle. The path I'd come in on had vanished, replaced by a wall of thick brush that hadn't been there before. No footprints, no sign I'd ever walked that way. I started moving, trying to stay calm. I know the woods, know how easy it is to panic and make it worse. So I kept to the slope of the land, trying to follow the way the water would flow. My boots crunched over old leaves, and sometimes I thought I heard something behind me, soft, like another set of steps just out of rhythm with mine. But every time I stopped, nothing. Just wind through the trees, cold wind. I walked for 6 hours. The sun didn't rise. The light didn't change. My watch stayed frozen at 12:12. By the time I stumbled into town, a place called Watley's Creek, little more than a gas station and a post office, I must have looked like hell. Mud caked to my boots, blood on my sleeve from where I'd scraped my arm. I went into the station, found a man behind the counter with skin like leather and a stare like stone. I told him what I'd seen, described the chapel, the bell, the way the trail vanished. He didn't blink. "You sure?" he asked, voice low. "You only heard it once?" I didn't answer, couldn't, because all that day, as I rested in a motel off Route 66, I kept hearing that sound again. Not loud, not outside, just there, behind the quiet. A sharp little chime, faint, waiting, and sometimes, when I touch the scar behind my ear, it feels like something's humming, something that hasn't finished yet. Story 1, the bell that called my name. I took that job because I needed money, plain and simple. 19, broke, and not cut out for college. I was lucky to get a government contract to work nights at the forestry station near Blanton Ridge. It wasn't glamorous, but I liked the quiet. I logged temperatures, watched for lightning strikes, checked in over the radio at set hours. My shift started just before dusk and ended when the sun came up. Most nights, I sat at the little desk in that one-room outpost drinking gas station coffee and reading books that never quite held my attention. The wind creaked through the trees, and sometimes, if the weather was right, you could hear coyotes howling low and mean. It was lonely, sure, but I never minded that part. Not at first. The outpost was about 5 miles from the old Milford Chapel, or what was left of it. Folks around Blanton didn't talk much about that place. I asked an older ranger about it once, and he just shook his head and said, "That ain't a place you go looking for." He said it caught fire back in 72, lightning strike during a freak storm. Took the roof and most of the walls. No one rebuilt it. Said some things ought to be left as they are. I didn't think much of it. People around here were always a little jumpy about their ghosts. It was October when it happened, One of those nights where the fog rises out of the hollers like smoke from an old stove, curling slowly around the trees, making the world feel smaller. The kind of fog that dulls sound and makes headlights look like flashlights under a sheet. I was halfway through a thermos of coffee, eyes burning, when I heard it, clear and cold, cutting through the night like something sharp. A church bell, 3 slow tolls, then silence, then 3 more. I froze. I knew there were no working churches out this far. None for 20 miles at least. And Milford didn't have a bell anymore. It hadn't for decades. I stood up, pressed my hand against the window and leaned close. The fog pressed back, thick and silver in the moonlight. I cracked the door open and stepped out onto the porch. No wind, no animal sounds, just the echo of the last bell toll slipping through the trees. Then I heard it. A voice, soft, faint, like someone calling through a storm from far away. I couldn't make out the words at first, but then it hit me. It was my name. Not just Lucas, not just the name everyone called me. Lucas Benjamin. Nobody uses my middle name. Not since my mother died. She was the only one who ever called me that, and even then, only when she was scared for me, when I got hurt, when I was sick, when she thought I might die. The voice said it just once, but it held in the air like a breath in winter. I backed into the station and slammed the door, locked it, pulled the curtain. I sat down, hand shaking on my coffee thermos, and told myself I was overtired. Maybe I'd dozed off and dreamed it. That made sense. That had to be it. Still, I kept the lights on the rest of the night, and I didn't sleep. The next morning, once the sun broke through and the fog thinned out, I grabbed my pack, got in the truck, and took the old access road that curved down toward the Milford site. I told myself it was just curiosity, a way to prove there was nothing there, that I was just hearing things. The road ended in gravel and weeds, and I had to hike the last mile. The air still held that heavy dampness from the night before, and the trees around the chapel site looked too still, like they were holding their breath. The church was mostly gone, like I'd heard, just half the stone foundation and a few charred beams jutting out like broken ribs. The roof had collapsed decades ago, and there was no sign of a bell or tower, just a single rusted frame where the steeple had stood. It creaked faintly in the wind, even though the morning was calm. But that wasn't what stopped me cold. At the center of the ruin, where the altar would have been, the ground was blackened. 3 distinct burn marks, maybe the size of footprints, bare feet, no shoes, just the impression of someone having stood there while fire rose beneath them. The stone around the marks wasn't scorched, just those 3 spots, as if fire had only touched what it needed to. I stood there too long enough for the air to shift, for the birds to go silent, for the hair on my arms to lift. I started to feel watched, not from the trees but from underneath, like something below the earth had just opened an eye. I left fast, and I didn't go back. Not then. Over the next few nights, things got stranger. The radio would crackle with static at exactly 12:03. The lights would flicker once, not before or after. And the wind would carry sounds that didn't belong. A door creaking where there was no door. The faint lilt of an organ chord. The low hum of a hymn with no words. On the 5th night, I found 3 small pebbles on the porch, perfectly black, perfectly round, set in a triangle. I tossed them into the woods. The next night, they were back, but this time they were warm. I quit that job a week later. No dramatic exit. Just left a note on the desk and drove down the mountain at dawn without looking back. I didn't tell anyone why, didn't see the point. No one would have believed me. I tried to forget. I moved, took work down near Asheville. For a while things were quiet. I started to believe maybe it was all in my head. Stress, isolation, a bad mix of coffee and loneliness. Until a few months ago, I was at a rest stop on my way through Boone. Cold morning, snow, threatening. I went into the bathroom to wash up, and when I looked in the mirror, someone had written something in the fogged-up glass. Just 5 letters. LBCMN. No one calls me that. No one could have known. I wiped the mirror, looked around, heart hammering. I was alone. Now, sometimes, I still hear the bell. Not every night, but sometimes, when I wake between dreams, I hear it, 3 slow tolls, and every time I feel something beneath me shift, like the earth remembering my name. I don't go near churches anymore. And if I ever hear a bell after midnight, I don't look, I don't listen, because I think, one day, it won't just call my name, it'll ask me to answer,